My name is Avery Callahan. I'm 28 years old. And for most of my life, my family treated me like the broken version of my sister. My parents used to joke about it at dinner parties. Ella got the brains, my dad would say with a laugh. And Avery got creativity. Everyone would chuckle like it was harmless. But trust me, it didn't feel harmless. Especially when you grow up in a family like mine. The Callahans were old-money Chicago real estate royalty. Our name was stamped on hospitals, libraries, and half the skyline downtown. My father, Victor Callahan, ran the company my grandmother built from scratch, Callahan Development Group. By 2024, the company was worth nearly $100 million. And my older sister Ella? She was the golden child. Straight A's. Debate champion. Ivy League everything. Meanwhile, I was the kid who struggled to read. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 7. Words didn't sit still on the page. They twisted and flipped like they were playing some cruel little game. But instead of helping me, my parents just labeled me slow. When I was 12, they hired elite tutors for Ella. SAT prep. French immersion classes. Violin lessons with a teacher from Juilliard. When I asked if I could get help for reading, my mom sighed like I'd asked for a private jet. Avery, we've already spent so much money trying to help you. Some kids just aren't academic. I believed her. So I stopped asking. Instead, I figured things out my own way. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I built crazy visual note systems, diagrams, charts, color-coded maps, anything that helped my brain understand things. And every Sunday, I took the train across Chicago to visit the one person who actually believed in me. My grandmother, Margaret Callahan. She was the real founder of the company, a woman who built a real estate empire starting from a tiny office above a bakery in 1967. Grandma never treated me like I was broken. She used stories instead of textbooks. She'd spread old property contracts across her coffee table and explain how deals worked like puzzle pieces. One afternoon she squeezed my hand and said something I never forgot. Avery, you don't read slower because you're less intelligent. She smiled softly. You read slower because you're seeing things other people miss. I didn't understand what she meant back then. Not really. Because I still had to survive life in the Callahan family. And surviving meant enduring moments like Christmas dinner in 2018. 20 relatives around a giant mahogany table. Crystal glasses. Catered steak. And my father standing up to make his annual announcement. My daughter Ella has been accepted into Harvard Law School. The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Pride. Then his eyes slid down the table, toward me. And Avery. He paused. The warmth disappeared from his voice. Well, Avery is also here tonight. A few people laughed. Not loud. Not cruel. Just uncomfortable. Like they didn't know what else to do. I stared down at my plate. The food blurred through the tears. I refused to cry. Then a thin hand slid over mine beneath the table. Grandma. When I looked up, she wasn't smiling. She was staring directly at my father. And the anger in her eyes was ice cold. She didn't say anything that night. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and handed me a small wooden box. Keep this safe, she said quietly. Don't open it yet. Her grip tightened around my hand. You'll know when the time comes. I had no idea what she meant. But 5 years later, that little box would destroy everything my father thought he controlled. And it would start on the most important night of my sister's life. Her graduation celebration. The night a stranger walked up to me and handed me an envelope that would flip the entire Callahan empire upside down. And trust me. What was inside that envelope? No one in that ballroom was ready for it. Not my father. Not my sister. And definitely not the board of directors. But in less than 72 hours, their entire world was about to change. May 12, 2024. The Grand Regency Ballroom in downtown Chicago looked like something straight out of a billionaire's fantasy. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne towers. A jazz band playing smooth Frank Sinatra covers in the corner. 300 guests filled the room, investors, politicians, old money families. All of them there for one reason. To celebrate Ella Callahan, Harvard Law graduate and the future queen of Callahan Development Group. And me? I was seated at table 26, right next to the catering station. Classic. My black dress cost $70 from Zara, which apparently offended my mother's soul. When she saw me near the entrance, she scanned me from head to toe. Her lips tightened. Avery, this is what you wore. It's what I could afford, I said quietly. She adjusted her diamond bracelet like my existence was wrinkling the air. Well, try not to draw attention to yourself tonight. Then she leaned closer, her perfume suffocating. Tonight is Ella's night. Don't embarrass the family. She walked away before I could answer. I found my seat at the back of the ballroom. From there, I could see the massive banner hanging above the stage. Congratulations, Ella Callahan, Harvard Law 2024. At 8:30 p.m., the lights dimmed. My father stepped onto the stage holding a champagne glass. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed, tonight we celebrate an extraordinary young woman. The applause started immediately. Ella joined him in a stunning emerald designer gown. She looked perfect. Flawless. Untouchable. Victor Callahan's pride radiated across the entire room. My daughter graduated in the top 5% of her Harvard class, he announced. More applause. Camera flashes. But tonight, I have another announcement. Ella smiled politely. My stomach tightened. Something about my father's tone felt theatrical. Effective immediately, he said proudly, Ella Callahan will inherit my estate and become the future CEO of Callahan Development Group. The room exploded. Standing ovation. Investors cheering. Phones recording. And at table 26. Not a single person looked at me. The woman sitting beside me whispered awkwardly. So, what does that mean for you? I didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, I noticed someone standing near the ballroom doors. A silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't celebrating. He was just watching me. 5 minutes later, he started walking toward my table. Slow. Deliberate. Like he had been waiting for the exact right moment. He stopped beside me. Miss Callahan? I looked up. Yes. He handed me a cream envelope sealed with red wax. My name is Daniel Harper, he said quietly. I was your grandmother's attorney. My heart skipped. She left something for you. I stared at the envelope. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. I'm aware, he replied calmly. She instructed me to deliver this document on the day your father publicly erased you from the family. My throat went dry. What is it? Daniel Harper's eyes softened slightly. Her real will. The ballroom roared with celebration behind me. But suddenly, all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat. Because the lawyer leaned closer and whispered one final sentence. The one your father doesn't know exists. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My grandmother had been planning this. For years. And whatever was inside that envelope? It was about to blow up everything my father had just celebrated on that stage. I couldn't breathe inside that ballroom anymore. The music. The laughter. The champagne glasses clinking. It all felt fake. Like I was watching someone else's life from underwater. So I grabbed the envelope and slipped out through the service hallway. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The smell of roasted steak drifted from the kitchen. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. Inside were 3 pages of legal documents. Typed. Stamped. Notarized. At the top of the page was a name I knew better than anyone. Margaret Louise Callahan. My grandmother. And the date. September 12, 2019. 5 months after she had given me that mysterious wooden box. I forced my eyes to focus on the words. The letters swam like they always did. But slowly. Carefully. I read. I, Margaret Louise Callahan, being of sound mind. Legal language filled the page. Then my eyes landed on one paragraph. And everything inside me stopped. To my granddaughter, Avery Grace Callahan, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Callahan Development Group, along with all voting rights associated with those shares. I blinked. Once. Twice. My brain refused to process the sentence. 51%. That meant majority control of the entire company. Worth nearly $100 million. My hands shook harder as I kept reading. This bequest is made with full awareness of my son Victor's treatment of Avery. A lump formed in my throat. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity not because of lack of intelligence, but because of lack of support. Tears blurred the page. Then came the sentence that shattered me. Avery is not slow. Avery was abandoned. I pressed the paper against my chest. Grandma knew. She had seen everything. The will continued. And therefore, I entrust the future of this company to the only member of this family who understands its true foundation. My voice whispered the last line aloud. I choose Avery. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. Daniel Harper stood at the end of the hallway. You read it. Yes. He checked his watch. There is one more detail. My stomach twisted. What? The will includes a 72-hour activation clause. Meaning? You must request an emergency board meeting within 3 days. My pulse spiked. And if I don't? His voice was calm. Then the will becomes invalid. Silence filled the hallway. 3 days. 3 days to challenge my father. 3 days to turn the entire company upside down. Through the ballroom doors I could still see my father laughing on stage with Ella. Celebrating a future he believed was already decided. Daniel Harper studied my face carefully. Your grandmother believed in you. He handed me his card. The question now is whether you believe in yourself. I stared at the will again. For 28 years, I had been the family failure. The quiet one. The forgotten one. But suddenly, I held something far more powerful than their approval. I held control of the empire they thought I'd never touch. And if I used it, my father's world would collapse in a single boardroom meeting. But the real question wasn't whether I could destroy him. The real question was I brave enough to try? I sat alone in my apartment that night. Not the kind of apartment my family would approve of. It was a small one-bedroom in Logan Square, the kind with creaky floors and neighbors who played music too loud on weekends. But it was mine. And right now, the only thing sitting on the coffee table was the wooden box my grandmother gave me 5 years ago. I hadn't opened it. Not once. Back then, she told me I'd know when the time was right. Well, if tonight wasn't the right time, I didn't know what was. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were 3 things. A USB drive. A thick manila folder. and a handwritten note in my grandmother's careful cursive. My chest tightened as I unfolded the paper. Avery. If you're reading this, then Victor finally did what I knew he would. He pushed you out of the family for good. I swallowed hard. Your father thinks this company belongs to him. But he forgot something important. I built it. My eyes burned as I kept reading. Inside this box is proof of something Victor hopes never sees daylight. He's been hiding millions from the board for years. I froze. What? My hands slowly opened the manila folder. Inside were copies of financial records, offshore transfers, and property deals routed through shell companies. Dozens of them. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just shady accounting. This looked like full-blown fraud. The note continued. I confronted him once. He promised he'd fix it. He lied. So I started collecting proof. My breath felt shallow now. If Victor ever tries to erase you from the family, you deserve the truth. I stared at the final line. You were never the weak one, Avery. You were the one he feared the most. Tears slid down my face. Because suddenly, I understood. Grandma hadn't just given me control of the company. She'd given me the weapon to protect it. The USB drive probably contained everything. Years of evidence. Enough to destroy my father if the board ever saw it. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel Harper. The board agreed to meet tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours away. My father still thought he'd won tonight. He thought Ella's future as CEO was guaranteed. But sitting in my tiny apartment, with a will in one hand and evidence of fraud in the other, I realized something terrifying. By this time tomorrow, my father might not just lose his company. He might lose everything. But there was one problem. A massive one. To activate the will, I had to walk into that boardroom, stand in front of 12 powerful executives, and challenge the most powerful man in my life. My father. And if I failed, I wouldn't just lose the company. I'd lose the last piece of my grandmother's legacy. So I wiped my tears, closed the box, and made a decision that would change the Callahan family forever. Tomorrow. I wasn't walking into that boardroom as the forgotten daughter. I was walking in as the majority owner. And my father had absolutely no idea. The Callahan Development headquarters towered over downtown Chicago like a monument to my father's ego. 52 floors of glass and steel. His name was literally engraved in the marble lobby. Callahan Development Group. Walking inside felt surreal. The receptionist nearly dropped her phone when she saw me. Avery, do you have an appointment? Yes, I said calmly. With the board. Her eyebrows shot up. Because normally, I wasn't allowed anywhere near the executive floor. But today was different. Today I had legal authority. The elevator ride to the 48th floor felt like it lasted an hour. When the doors opened, the entire boardroom was already full. 12 board members. 3 lawyers. And at the head of the table, Victor Callahan. My father. The moment he saw me, confusion flickered across his face. Then annoyance. Avery, he said sharply. This is a private meeting. I stepped inside anyway. Daniel Harper followed behind me carrying a leather briefcase. That's correct, the lawyer said calmly. A private meeting requested by the majority shareholder. The room went silent. My father frowned. Majority shareholder? That would be her, Daniel Harper interrupted. And then he placed my grandmother's will on the table. Every single person leaned forward. Victor laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, come on, he said. This again? Mother left everything to the family trust. We already handled probate years ago. Daniel Harper slid another document across the table. The court disagrees. Victor's smile disappeared. The board members began flipping through the pages. I watched their faces change. Confusion. Shock. Realization. One of the directors looked up slowly. Victor. His voice was tight. Your mother left 51% of the company to Avery. The room exploded with whispers. My father's face turned pale. That's impossible. It's notarized, another board member said. And legally binding. For the first time in my life. Victor Callahan looked scared. His eyes locked onto mine. What did you do? My voice was steady. I didn't do anything. I placed the USB drive on the table. My grandmother did. Daniel Harper cleared his throat. And there's one more matter the board needs to review. He plugged the USB into the conference screen. Rows of financial files appeared instantly. Offshore accounts. Hidden transactions. Illegal transfers. Gasps filled the room. One board member slammed his hand on the table. Victor, what the hell is this? My father stared at the screen like the floor had vanished beneath him. Because in one single moment, his empire, his reputation, and his control over the company were collapsing. And for the first time in 28 years, every person in that room wasn't looking at my father. They were looking at me. But the most shocking part of the meeting was still about to happen. Because one of the board members leaned forward and asked the question no one expected. Avery. Now that you control the company, what exactly do you plan to do with it? And my answer was about to shock everyone in that room, including my father. The boardroom had never been this quiet before. 12 executives sat frozen around the polished oak table, staring at the financial files still glowing on the screen. Offshore transfers. Hidden shell companies. Millions of dollars moved where they were never supposed to go. The silence felt heavy. Like the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. My father finally spoke. This is ridiculous, Victor Callahan snapped. His voice had lost that smooth confidence he always carried. These are old documents taken out of context. He pointed at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into his house. And my daughter clearly has no idea how corporate finance works. That line didn't hurt the way it used to. Not anymore. Because now the room wasn't laughing with him. They were watching him. One of the board members, Martin Alvarez, leaned forward slowly. Victor, he said carefully, these transfers total over $8 million. Another director shook his head. And they weren't reported to the board. Victor stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. But Daniel Harper calmly slid another document across the table. I'm afraid it's not. Everyone looked down. The document was simple. A motion for an immediate leadership vote. My father's eyes widened. You can't be serious. Daniel's voice stayed calm. The majority shareholder has the legal authority to request a CEO vote. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. For 28 years, I had been invisible in rooms like this. Ignored. Dismissed. Forgotten. But now I could feel something shift. Power. Real power. Victor looked at me like he didn't recognize the person standing there. You're making a mistake, Avery, he warned. His voice dropped lower. You don't understand what running this company takes. I met his stare. Maybe not. Then I gestured to the screen full of secret transactions. But I understand what destroying it looks like. A few board members exchanged glances. Victor laughed nervously. You really think they'll vote for you? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure. Then Martin Alvarez cleared his throat. All in favor of initiating a CEO vote. One by one, hands began to rise. First 2. Then 5. Then 8. Victor's face drained of color. By the time the last hand lifted, the decision was unanimous. The room had officially lost faith in Victor Callahan. For the first time in decades, the empire he controlled was slipping out of his hands. Victor slowly sat down again. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Then Martin turned toward me. Miss Callahan, he said carefully. Would you like to nominate yourself for CEO? The question hung in the air. This was the moment. The moment my father feared. The moment my grandmother had prepared for. But the answer I gave next was something no one in that room expected. And especially not my father. Every person in that boardroom was staring at me. Waiting. Expecting the obvious answer. Yes. Of course I would say yes. After all, I now controlled 51% of the entire company. I could take the CEO seat instantly. And part of me wanted to. A small, angry part. The same part that remembered every dinner where my father mocked me. Every school event he skipped. Every time he introduced Ella as his real success. It would be easy. Too easy. I could take everything from him right now. But then I remembered my grandmother's voice. This company wasn't built for ego. It was built for people. So instead of answering immediately, I took a slow breath. Then I said something that shocked the entire room. No. The word landed like a thunderclap. Victor blinked. What? The board members looked confused. You don't want to be CEO? Martin asked. I shook my head gently. Not yet. Whispers spread around the table. I walked slowly toward the large window overlooking the Chicago skyline. For the first time, I understood what my grandmother meant when she said I saw things others missed. This company wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was neighborhoods. Buildings. People's homes. And if I rushed into leadership just to prove a point, I'd become exactly what my father was. Someone who cared more about winning than building. So I turned back to the board. My grandmother trusted me with the future of this company, I said. And the first decision I'm making is protecting it. Martin raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? I looked straight at my father. It means the company needs leadership that the board actually trusts. Then I nodded toward Martin. You've been COO for 12 years. The room went still. I nominate Martin Alvarez as interim CEO. Martin nearly choked on his coffee. Wait, what? You know the projects, the staff, the finances, I said calmly. And unlike my father, the board actually respects you. Several directors nodded. Victor looked like he'd just been punched in the chest. You're giving away your power, he said bitterly. I shook my head. No. Then I placed the USB drive back on the table. I'm protecting it. Martin slowly stood up. I accept the nomination. Within minutes, the board voted again. Unanimous. Martin Alvarez became the new CEO of Callahan Development. Victor Callahan? Removed. Effective immediately. Security arrived shortly after. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. My father grabbed his coat slowly. Before leaving the room, he looked at me one last time. For the first time in my life. There was no arrogance in his eyes. Only disbelief. You think you've won, he said quietly. I held his gaze. No. My voice stayed calm. I think Grandma did. But what happened 3 weeks later? When the financial investigation became public, would shock the entire country. Because Victor Callahan's fall was only just beginning. And the most emotional moment of this entire story was still waiting for me. 3 weeks later, the story broke. It started as a small article on a Chicago business blog. Then it spread like wildfire. By noon, every major news outlet was covering it. Callahan Development founder's son under investigation for financial fraud. Reporters crowded outside the company headquarters. Camera crews camped across the street. Stock analysts debated the scandal on television like it was the Super Bowl of corporate drama. And right in the middle of it all was my father, Victor Callahan. The man who had spent 30 years building his reputation as one of Chicago's most powerful businessmen. Now his face was on every screen in America. But not in the way he wanted. Federal investigators have confirmed that millions of dollars were transferred through offshore accounts connected to Victor Callahan, one news anchor reported. Sources say the investigation could lead to criminal charges. Inside Callahan Development, things were tense. Employees whispered in the hallways. Investors demanded emergency meetings. But under Martin Alvarez's leadership, something surprising started happening. The company stabilized. Projects continued. Clients stayed. Because for the first time in years, the company wasn't being run by fear. One afternoon, I stood in Martin's office looking out at the skyline. "You saved this company," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No. I thought of my grandmother. She did." Martin smiled. "You know, the board has been talking." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About the future." He leaned back in his chair. "They want you to take the CEO position." I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Not to my father. Not to the board. Not to anyone. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." 5 minutes later, I walked outside the building. And there he was. Standing across the street. Victor Callahan. My father looked older than I remembered. His suit was wrinkled. His hair grayer. The powerful man who once controlled an empire now looked tired. He stepped toward me slowly. "Avery." His voice sounded unfamiliar. Quiet. Almost fragile. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he finally said the words I never expected to hear. I was wrong. The wind moved softly through the Chicago streets. Cars passed behind us. But in that moment, the entire world felt quiet. My father looked at the ground before speaking again. "I spent my whole life believing strength meant control," he said. "Control of the company. Control of the family. Control of everything." He let out a bitter laugh. And in the process, I lost the one thing that actually mattered. His eyes finally met mine. "You." Those words hit harder than I expected. For years, I imagined this moment. The day he would realize what he had done. The day he would apologize. But standing here now, it didn't feel like victory. It just felt sad. "You made your choice a long time ago," I said softly. "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "And I can't undo it." He hesitated before continuing. "But I needed to tell you something." I waited. He swallowed hard. "Your grandmother always believed you were the strongest one in the family." My chest tightened. I didn't understand that back then. His eyes softened. "But now I do. For the first time in my life." My father looked at me not with disappointment. Not with judgment. But with something I had never seen before. Respect. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. But I hope someday, you'll remember me as more than the man who failed you. He turned to leave. Then paused. One more thing. I looked up. The company, it's safe with you. And then he walked away. No arguments. No drama. Just a broken man disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go. And realized something important. I didn't hate him anymore. Because the truth was, the person I needed approval from had never been my father. It had always been me. 6 months later, the board officially voted me in as CEO of Callahan Development Group. But the company looked very different now. We launched programs to build affordable housing across Chicago. We invested in community schools. We even started a scholarship fund for students with learning disabilities. Because no kid should grow up believing their brain makes them less capable. The day we opened the first scholarship program, I visited my grandmother's grave. I placed a small wooden box beside the flowers. The same box she gave me years ago. You were right, I whispered. The wind rustled softly through the trees. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peaceful. Because the girl who once sat at the back of the ballroom. The girl everyone overlooked. The girl they called slow. She didn't just inherit an empire. She rebuilt it. And the greatest lesson my grandmother ever taught me? Was something I now shared with every young intern who walked into our office. Success isn't about proving people wrong. I smiled softly as I looked at the Chicago skyline. It's about proving to yourself that you were never broken in the first place. And somewhere, I like to believe, my grandmother was smiling too.